wind in Montana had no manners. It tore across the open plains like a living beast, dragging red dust and cold air that burned the skin. The sky stretched wide and merciless, a pale blue dome above an unforgiving land. Into that vast emptiness walked Emily Rose. Her brown wool dress was heavy with dust. Her boots cracked from 100 miles of walking. She was 19, but the years of struggle had carved lines of quiet strength into her face. Her green eyes held no illusions, only the will to survive. Emily had no family left. The world had taught her early that survival was a trade. She gave work for bread, silence for peace, and her strength for shelter. But each trade took something from her, leaving her thinner, harder, quieter. Now she stood at the edge of the Double S Ranch, the last chance she had left. Have you ever walked so far that your past becomes a shadow you can't outrun? Have you ever wondered if redemption is real or just another word people use to feel better about their cruelty? The ranch was a cluster of weather-beaten buildings, standing firm against the cruel wind. The wide corral stretched behind a bunkhouse full of rough voices and rougher men. Emily stopped, brushed the dust from her skirt, and walked toward the porch. 5 men sat there, their eyes tracking her like wolves watching a deer. One had a thick gray beard and a face like cracked leather. He looked her up and down, slow and deliberate. "I'm looking for the man in charge," Emily said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I heard you might need a cook." The red-haired cowboy laughed. "Well now, look what the wind blew in. A pretty little bird lost on the prairie." The others chuckled, but Emily kept her gaze on the gray-bearded man. The foreman, Silas, rose to his feet, his joints creaking like old saddle leather. "We had a cook," he said. "Old fella drank himself near blind and set fire to the kitchen. Took off swearing he'd wrestle a bear. You any better than that?" "I don't drink," Emily replied. "And I can cook. Stew, bread, beans. I can mend, clean, whatever you need. I work hard." The red-haired cowboy, Red Callahan, leaned forward, smirking. "Hard work, huh? I can think of a few chores for a woman like you." The men laughed again, but Silas's eyes stayed on her face. There was something in her posture, a quiet determination that made him pause. Finally, he grunted. "All right, you can start tonight. $10 a month, room and board. But if you make trouble or your food's no good, you're gone." It wasn't much, but it was more than she had. Emily nodded. "Thank you, Jed," Silas said, jerking his chin toward a lanky young cowboy. "Show her the cook's quarters." Jed smiled lazily. "This way, darling. Don't worry. We'll take good care of you." Emily picked up her small bundle and followed him, her back straight. Every step felt like defiance. Her new room was a narrow space behind the main house, a small bed, a stove, and a single window. It wasn't much, but it was hers. That night she cooked for 20 men. Beef stew thick with potatoes, fresh bread, and strong coffee. The cowboys ate like wolves, but by the time the plates were clean, no one complained. Silas gave a satisfied grunt. "You'll do." Days fell into a rhythm. Emily rose before dawn, stoked the stove, ground coffee, and baked biscuits. Her hands became raw and cracked, but she didn't stop. She spoke little, moving with quiet precision. The men still watched her, still muttered crude jokes, but their tone began to change. Her cooking tamed them more than her words ever could. Yet one man never joined their laughter. Jacob Stone. He was tall, lean, and carried himself with quiet authority. He worked beside the other cowboys, fixing fences, calming horses, always silent, always steady. The others treated him with a curious respect that Emily didn't yet understand. His eyes were gray, the color of a storm over the plains, and when they met hers for the first time, she felt something she couldn't name. His gaze wasn't mocking or hungry. It was simply knowing. After that day, small things began to appear at her door. A bucket already filled with water from the well. A stack of kindling split perfectly, just right for her stove. No one said a word, but Emily knew it was him. She watched him from the kitchen window as he worked. He was strong but never boastful, quiet but not weak. Sometimes she caught him glancing her way, only to turn back quickly, as if afraid to be caught. Her fragile peace shattered one evening when Red Callahan returned from town. He sauntered into the dining room, his grin sharp as a knife. "Had myself a talk down at the saloon in Dusty Creek," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Barkeep says there used to be a girl at the Dove's Rest. Looks just like our sweet little cook." The room went still. The Dove's Rest wasn't a hotel. It was a brothel. Emily froze, the ladle trembling in her hand. "That's a lie." Red smirked. "Sure it is. You just happen to work there, huh? Washing dishes, maybe. That what they call it now." Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and cruel. The men's eyes turned on her, judging, mocking, condemning. Emily's voice came out low and trembling. "You're mistaken." No one believed her. Even Silas said nothing. And at the far end of the table sat Jacob Stone. He didn't look up. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white, but he said nothing. That silence cut deeper than any insult. Emily's heart twisted, but she didn't cry. She set down the ladle and walked out. Each step measured, controlled. The door closed behind her, with a click that echoed in the stunned quiet. Outside, snow had begun to fall. The first flakes drifted gently down, soft and white, covering the ground where the wind had scoured it bare. She stood in the cold, her breath misting in the air, feeling the truth she already knew settle over her. No matter how hard she worked, this world would never let her escape what it thought she was. But she would not break. Not here. Not tonight. Inside, the men returned to their food, but the taste had gone bitter. Jacob sat frozen, his chest tight with something between guilt and shame. He had stayed silent once before, years ago, when a girl's life had been ruined before his eyes. Now history was repeating itself, and once again, he had done nothing. Outside, Emily stared into the snow, the wind howling like the ghosts of all the women the world had forgotten. The storm was coming, and she felt it in her bones. This was only the beginning. Do you believe that silence can be more violent than words? That watching someone drown and doing nothing is the same as pushing them under? The storm came down like a punishment from heaven. By morning, the world was buried under white. The bunkhouse roof sagged under the weight, and the wind howled through the cracks like a chorus of ghosts. Inside, the men stayed close to the fire, their tempers short and their pride sharper than their knives. Emily moved among them in silence, her face pale but unreadable. She cooked, she cleaned, she endured. The men's laughter was quieter now, meaner. They spoke loud enough for her to hear. "Guess she's used to serving men. Reckon she's got other skills than cooking." Their cruelty was deliberate, a test, but she never flinched. Every insult, every whisper became fuel. She rose before dawn, chopped her own wood, fetched her own water, and baked bread as if to prove that nothing they said could touch her. The red in her hands came not from shame, but from work. Her silence became her armor, her strength. And always there was Jacob, watching her from the distance, saying nothing, but his eyes carried a weight only she could feel. He was haunted. She could see that now. He carried something deep inside, a memory, a regret that chained him. Days turned into weeks. The snow thickened, the cold deepened, and the men's patience grew thin. It was Red Callahan who finally snapped. Emily had gone to the barn to gather eggs. The air inside was warmer, heavy with the smell of hay. She moved carefully, her basket balanced in her arms. Then she heard the door creak open behind her. "Well, look what we got here," Red drawled, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "All alone, little bird." Emily's heart pounded. "Leave me be," she said, her voice firm but low. Red stepped closer, his boots crunching on the straw. "You don't got to act so high and mighty. I ain't asking for much." His hand reached out toward her face. "Don't you touch me." He laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Feisty. I like that." "That's enough, Red." The voice was low, calm, but it sliced through the air like a whip. Red turned. Jacob stood in the doorway, his gray eyes dark with fury. The lantern light caught the hard planes of his face. "This ain't your business." Red spat. "It is now." Before Red could finish, Jacob moved. His fist connected with Red's jaw in a single, clean strike that sent the cowboy sprawling. The fight that followed was brutal. Red swung wildly, but Jacob fought with cold precision. Every blow driven by a fire that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with something older. Shame. guilt, redemption. When it ended, Red lay in the snow, his lips split and one eye swelling shut. Jacob stood over him, chest heaving. "You'll stay away from her," he said, his voice trembling with restrained rage. "You'll not speak her name again." The other men, drawn by the noise, gathered around. No one dared step in. Jacob's eyes swept over them, daring anyone to challenge him. None did. Then his gaze met Emily's. For a moment neither spoke. The cold wind blew between them, carrying the smell of blood and snow. She saw the storm inside him, the same one that raged outside. Then he turned away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. After that day, everything changed. The open mockery stopped, replaced by something worse, silence. The men avoided her now, their eyes sliding away whenever she passed. She was a ghost haunting her own kitchen. Even kindness had become dangerous. Jacob's protection had cost her what little place she had. But in the stillness that followed, small gestures began again. A new blanket folded on her cot. Fresh water left by her door. Paths cleared through the snow, so she wouldn't slip. She knew it was him, though he never said a word. The nights grew longer. The wind screamed across the plains, shaking the walls of the kitchen. She tried not to think of Jacob, but she felt him everywhere, in the sound of boots crunching outside, in the soft thud of logs being split before dawn. Then came the fire. It started just before midnight, a single spark in the stove, carried by the wind. Emily woke to the smell of smoke, thick and sharp. The air was hot, her lungs burning. The flames had already climbed the walls. The kitchen, the heart of her small world, was turning into an inferno. She coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve, but the smoke clawed its way down her throat. The window was jammed shut with ice. Panic clawed at her. She threw herself at it, but it wouldn't open. Then, through the roar of the fire, she heard shouting outside. "Emily!" Jacob's voice. She tried to answer, but her voice broke into a cough. The flames were everywhere now, eating through the walls, the floor groaning beneath her feet. She sank to her knees, dizzy, her world collapsing into a swirl of orange and black. The door burst open. Jacob came through the flames like a vision, a soaked horse blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. He found her by the window, scooped her into his arms, and ran. The world was fire and wind. He shielded her with his body as the roof began to collapse. Then suddenly they were outside, the cold air slicing into them like knives. He fell to his knees in the snow, clutching her to his chest. "Emily," he gasped, his voice raw. "Emily, breathe." She coughed, her lungs aching, her eyes fluttering open. The fire's glow danced across his face. His gray eyes were filled with fear, not for himself, but for her. In that moment, she saw the truth. The man who had stayed silent in the dining hall, who had left wood at her door, who had fought for her without words. He wasn't a coward. He was a man fighting ghosts. Their eyes locked. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The flames behind them roared and crackled, devouring the night. But all Emily could see was him. Do you believe that sometimes God uses fire not to destroy, but to reveal? That the things we think will kill us are actually what save us? When she woke again, she was in a warm bed in the main house. Her lungs burned, her skin ached, but she was alive. On the table beside her sat a tray, a bowl of broth, a piece of bread, and a cup of tea. Jacob stood by the window, his back to her. "You should eat," he said quietly. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved my life." He turned, his face shadowed. "Anyone would have." "No," she said, her eyes steady. "Not anyone." He said nothing, but the truth hung between them, stronger than words. Over the next few days, they found an uneasy rhythm. Jacob spoke little, but he lingered, by her door, by the fire, by the window. When he thought she wasn't looking, he told her stories about the land, about the river that froze every winter, about the mountains that glowed gold in the morning light. She listened, her heart softening against her will. Then one evening, as the wind howled outside, she asked the question that had been waiting between them. "Who are you really, Jacob?" He hesitated. Then quietly he said, "My father is Samuel Stone. He owns the double S." This land. All of it. Emily froze. The room felt smaller suddenly. You're the owner's son. He nodded. I didn't want to live as my father's shadow. I wanted to earn my place. So I worked here same as the others. Her heart twisted. You let me think you were one of them. You let me work myself raw. Let me believe. She stopped, shaking her head. You're just like the rest. A man with power playing at being humble. No, Jacob said, stepping closer. Emily, that's not it. I needed to be seen for who I was, not what I owned. And you're the only one who ever saw me. But she couldn't hear it. Her heart was pounding too loudly. The old wounds of being used, dismissed, pitted split open all over again. I can't stay here, she said, backing away. I won't be your charity. Emily. She fled before he could finish. That night, the storm worsened. Snow whipped against the windows, piling high against the doors. The ranch was buried in a white cage. Emily stayed in her room, her mind a whirl of hurt and confusion. She had survived fire, cruelty, and gossip, but nothing hurt like feeling betrayed by the one man she had begun to trust. On the third night of the blizzard, she couldn't stand the walls any longer. She wrapped herself in a heavy coat and slipped out into the dark, fighting the wind all the way to the barn. Inside, the air was cold but still. She closed her eyes and listened to the horses breathing. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. A light flickered. She turned. Jacob was standing at the far end, holding a lantern. His hair was dusted with snow, his face pale from the cold. I knew I'd find you here, he said softly. She wiped her eyes. When the storm breaks, I'm leaving. He stepped closer, his voice tight. Don't leave because of me. That's the only reason I have to go, she said. You gave me a bed, food, safety. But I won't be another debt you pay. It's not a debt, Emily, Jacob said, his voice breaking. It's love. She froze. He took another step closer, his gray eyes blazing with something raw and real. From the first moment you walked up that porch, I saw you. I saw your courage. I saw your fire. It's been about you ever since. She wanted to speak, but her voice caught. I know I hurt you, he said, but I swear it wasn't out of pride. It was fear of losing the only good thing I've ever known. The wind screamed outside, rattling the barn doors. Inside, the world went quiet. He reached out, his calloused hand brushing her cheek. Don't be gentle, she whispered, her voice trembling. His breath hitched, a faint smile breaking through the storm on his face. I'll love you until dawn, he murmured, the words a vow more sacred than any prayer. He kissed her then, slow and fierce, and the fire that had once tried to kill them now burned between them, warm, bright, unstoppable. That night, as the blizzard raged outside, they found in each other what neither had ever known, peace. It was not about lust or conquest. It was about healing. Two broken souls finding their way home in each other's arms. Do you believe that the deepest intimacy isn't taking what you want, but giving what the other person needs? That don't be gentle can mean, see me as strong enough to love you fully? When dawn came, the world outside was silent. The storm had passed. Jacob woke to the soft light of morning, and the warmth of Emily's body curled against his. For a long moment, he watched her sleep. Then he rose, the weight of truth pressing on him. There was one more ghost he had to face. When she opened her eyes, he was sitting at the edge of the bed, his hands clasped. Emily, he said, his voice heavy, there's something you should know. He told her everything, about Arizona, about the saloon called the Dove's Rest, about the terrified girl accused of stealing a watch, about the boy in the corner who did nothing to stop it. Her breath caught. That was you. He nodded, his eyes full of torment. I saw you then. I was a coward. I've lived with that shame ever since. The room was still. The fire crackled softly. Emily's heart ached, not with anger, but understanding. The boy you were isn't the man you are, she said, her hand reaching for his. You saved me twice. Once from the fire, and once from myself. That boy's gone, Jacob. You buried him when you ran into those flames. His shoulders shook, the years of guilt breaking loose. She held him until the tremor stilled. When the blizzard finally cleared, Red Callahan and the men were waiting. angry and hungry. They wanted someone to blame. They turned on Emily again, calling her cursed, saying she'd brought ruin to the ranch. Jacob faced them in the snow. He stood tall, his coat whipping in the wind. "This ranch will have one law," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Emily Rose is my wife-to-be. Any man who disrespects or leaves this land today." Red sneered. "You think your father's name will protect you? You're still a coward." Jacob's eyes hardened. "No, not anymore." Red went for his gun. Jacob's shot rang out first. It hit the snow at Red's feet, the warning louder than any threat. The fight was over before it began. The storm ended that day, for the ranch and for them. Years later, the Double S Ranch thrived. Where the kitchen once burned, now stood the hearth, a warm inn and kitchen run by Emily, a haven for women who needed a fresh start. Jacob worked beside her, his eyes clear, his soul at peace. They were married on the porch under a sky as blue as her dress. The guests were few. The men who had stayed, Silas, and even Samuel Stone, older now but proud. When Jacob kissed Emily, it wasn't the kiss of a man claiming a woman. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found home. They stood together in the sunset, looking over the land that had tested them, broken them, and made them whole again. "Do you ever think about it?" Emily asked softly. "Every day," Jacob said, wrapping his arm around her. "But I thank God for it. Without the fire, I'd never have found you." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We all have ghosts, Jacob. The trick isn't to outrun them. It's to learn to live with them." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains gold. The wind, for once, was gentle. And in that quiet, perfect moment, the orphan and the guilty son, the sinner and the survivor stood side by side. Proof that even in the wildest heart of the West, love could rise from the ashes and burn brighter than any fire. Do you believe that redemption isn't given? It's earned through choosing to do what's right even when it costs you everything? That "I'll love you until dawn" isn't about one night, but about promising to love someone through every darkness until light comes again? This story reminds us that the deepest passion begins not with gentleness, but with permission, that silence can be violence, but action can be redemption, and that sometimes the person you save is the one who saves you right back. If this story moved you, subscribe for more Wild West tales of fire and redemption, stories of women who walked through flames and men who finally found courage, of love that began with "Don't be gentle" and ended with "Until dawn and beyond." Share your thoughts if you believe that the most powerful intimacy is built on truth, not secrets, that real men protect not with silence but with action, and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a knock at the door and end with a promise carved in fire.